بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة لأهل التقوى واليقين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين العبد المؤيد الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أما بعد، فقد قال الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون. Dear brothers and sisters, in this session I'm going to give a lecture on some of the rules of Taqlid. A person should either be a mujtahid or he should be a follower. If a person himself is a mujtahid, he can act on his own views and understanding of religious laws, because he himself is capable of understanding the Islamic laws, the divine sources, the Quran and Sunnah. He is capable of inferring, deducing, and discovering Islamic laws. So he must act according to his own understanding and comprehension of religious laws. Whatever he understands and whatever conclusion he reaches, he should act according to it. He cannot act according to the views and opinions of another mujtahid. In case a person himself is not a mujtahid, he must act according to the fatwa, verdicts of another mujtahid. He should rely on the fatwa and sayings or decisions reached by another jurist. He should trust him. And of course, as I mentioned, he must be the most qualified, the most eligible, the most learned, and the most capable of all mujtahid. Only the most learned mujtahid is eligible for taqlid. We have many jurists, many scholars in the Islamic seminaries, and all of them are not equally learned, they are not equally educated, they are not equally eligible. One out of them is the best. One out of them is the most educated, and one of them, of course, is the most learned. So we must always refer to the most learned, as I have stressed and said in my previous session. Okay, if a person himself is not a mujtahid, and he himself does not want to follow a mujtahid, is there a third option? Is there a third way which he could follow? Of course, there is a third way also. But as that is the most difficult way. And the third way is the way of precaution, what is known in Arabic as ihtiyat. A person who himself is not a mujtahid and he himself does not want to follow another mujtahid, he must act on such precaution to assure that he has followed the Islamic laws rightly and correctly. And of course, acting on precaution is not something easy. It's not simple. One should have enough knowledge of precaution. And to have knowledge of precaution is an arduous task. It is an uphill task. You cannot act on precaution unless you know where the precaution is and what is the nature of precaution, where you should act on precautionary measures. If there are, let me tell you, if there are two mujtahids, two jurisprudents, one of them says that a certain act is wajib, and the other says that it's not wajib. You must act according to the verdict of the mujtahid who says that it is wajib. And if there are two verdicts, one of which says that a certain act is haram, and another verdict says that it's not haram, it's allowable, you should stay away from doing that act. You should keep away from doing that act. This is what we call precaution. Precaution means, acting on precaution means to act prudently, to act carefully, to act in accordance with the rule that is most likely to be correct and most likely to be viewed as correct. There are some scholars who say that French cut beard is sufficient. But there are some scholars who say that French cut beard is not sufficient as a measure of obligatory precaution. Of course, I know of some fatwas and of some verdicts according to which French cut beard, or what some people say as goatee beard, is not sufficient as an obligatory precaution. But according to some other scholars, French cut beard is sufficient. Now, which is closer to precaution? Which is nearer to precaution? Of course, keeping full beard is closer to precaution. The mujtahid who says that French cut beard is not sufficient as an obligatory precaution, that fatwa is closer to precaution. If you do not want to be a muqallid, a follower, you should act on precaution. And of course, understanding the precautions, finding out the precautions, and having information and knowledge of precaution is something difficult. It's not easy for everyone. There are some people who say that we do not want to act on precaution and to be a follower, to imitate someone, to follow someone. There are such people, because they say that in this age of widespread education and knowledge, why should we follow someone? We can discover, we can find out the laws, the Islamic laws, the codes of practice by ourselves without relying on the verdicts of a scholar.
يا محول الحول والأحوال حول حالنا حول حالنا أحسن الحال.
Having said that, we conclude that it is not possible for all of us and for all Muslims, nor is it necessary for all Muslims to be mujtahid. We cannot be, because there are other activities, there are other professions which are obligatory to be learned, which are obligatory to be sought, and we should have different experts, different technicians, different people who engage in different arts and in different professions and in different skills. So all Muslims cannot be jurisprudents. That is natural. That is very clear. And of course, those who cannot and who are not mujtahids, they should follow another mujtahid and an expert. And those who do not want to act on precaution, they should also follow a mujtahid. There is no fourth option. There is no another way. There is no other way in front of us. Now, as I said, one of the qualifications and traits of a mujtahid is to be the most learned. There are some other conditions which I would like to enumerate and to explain for you. In order for a mujtahid to be qualified for taqlid, he must be male. He cannot be a woman. He cannot be female. This is one thing. Another, he should be sane. He must be in his senses, of course. And the third condition is that he must be mature. He must have reached the age of maturity, the age of puberty. He cannot be a young boy to be followed. He must have crossed the age of puberty. He must be above 15, 16. And of course, the older he is, the more experienced he is, the more knowledgeable he is. And another condition is that he must be a Shia of a Shia and the follower of the 12 Imams and the follower of the 14 infallibles, what we call or term as Shia Isna Ashari. He must be a follower of the 12 infallible Imams. And another condition which a qualified mujtahid must bear is that he should be legitimate by birth. He cannot be illegitimate by birth. And the fourth condition, which is very necessary and which is probably the most important condition, is that he must be just. He must be adil. In Arabic we say the word adil, but in English the term just is used. We use the term just to refer to a person who stays away from haram actions and does the wajibat, and of course who is known to be a good doing person. A person is said to be just when he has an inner fear of God or probity that prevents him from committing major sins and insisting on minor ones. Of course, some scholars have defined the term just in more simple terms, but some other scholars have defined the word just as a secondary habit, that makes a person do something without having to think before it, without having to premeditate on doing it. This is called the secondary habit. And of course, a mujtahid will not be qualified, will not be eligible for taqlid unless and until he has these qualifications, these conditions, and these traits which I just mentioned. Of course, these are some of the descriptions of a qualified mujtahid. The more God-fearing a mujtahid, the better he is, the more qualified he is, the more eligible he is. When it comes to some other rules of taqlid, I should say that there are a few other rules which I will mention right now. If a mujtahid is eligible for taqlid and you are following him, what should you do if he dies all of a sudden? Can you remain in taqlid of him? Can you still follow him? This is one question. Another question is that you have not been following another scholar, you have not been following a mujtahid. Can you initiate taqlid of a dead mujtahid given the fact that you have not been following any other mujtahid before this time? Can you begin following a mujtahid, a dead mujtahid, or not? When it comes to the first question, of course, if a qualified mujtahid passes away, a person can remain in his taqlid if he believes and if he's certain that his deceased mujtahid and his deceased jurist is still the most knowledgeable mujtahid. If a person is confident that his mujtahid who died is more learned than the living mujtahid, than the jurists who are still alive, then he must remain in taqlid of the same mujtahid. He cannot change his taqlid unless and until he comes to a conclusion that there is another mujtahid who is alive and who is more learned and more knowledgeable than the deceased mujtahid. And so far as he has not gained confidence, and so far as he has not become certain, he is under the obligation to remain in taqlid of the deceased mujtahid. As far as the second question is concerned, I should say that a person who wants to begin following a mujtahid, for example, a person has entered the age of puberty, he has entered the 16th year of his life, and he is now mature, he is now adult, and he should begin following a mujtahid. Of course, he cannot follow a dead mujtahid. There is a consensus among all scholars saying that a beginner, a person who wants to initiate taqlid of a mujtahid, he should start following a living mujtahid, a mujtahid or a jurist who is alive. There is no discrepancy, there is no discord, no difference when it comes to the answer of this question, when it comes to what I just said. So you should, if you have not followed anyone so far, and if you decide to follow someone, you cannot follow the scholars who have died, who have passed away. You have to look for a qualified mujtahid who is alive and who bears the conditions which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Now, assuming that you are following a mujtahid and everything is okay, and you are a follower and you are not a mujtahid yourself, and you are not acting on precaution, then there a question arises as to how we can get access to a mujtahid's fatwa. How can we come to the conclusion that this is the fatwa of the mujtahid whom you are going to follow or whom you are following? What are the ways through which you find knowledge or you just get access to your mujtahid's fatwa? There are 4 ways of obtaining the verdicts or the edicts of a mujtahid. The first way is that you yourself hear the fatwa of your mujtahid directly from the mujtahid himself. You are sitting in a gathering in which your mujtahid gives a lecture, gives his fatwa. You hear it from him, his fatwa. This is the first way. The second way is when you read his risala, his epistle of Islamic laws. The risala, of course, in the present time, most of the scholars, most of the mujtahideen have printed and published treatises and epistles of Islamic laws. You can buy them or provide them from the market, and of course you can go through them. Whatever you read in that risala is credible, it is authentic, and it can be trusted. This is the second way. And the third way is when one hears from a reliable person. You hear it from someone who is a trusted person, a trustworthy person, a reliable individual. This is the third way. And the fourth way is when it is known widely in public, for example, that a certain verdict or edict belongs to a certain mujtahid. For example, in the month of Ramadan, many people try to investigate what the fatwa of a certain mujtahid is regarding sighting the crescent, the new moon, and what is the fatwa of this and that mujtahid. So different people try to understand the fatwa of their own jurisprudent, their own scholar. So that's why we see that a certain fatwa becomes very much known, very much popular among Muslims, among mu'mineen, among the believers. So many people try to understand, many people come to know that, for example, a certain fatwa or edict belongs to a certain mujtahid. I think there is no doubt about that. This is a matter of fact.
ناجيتك يا رحمن ودعوتك يا ديان يا خالق الإنسان الله 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 يا خالق الإنسان الله الله الله.
These are the four ways of obtaining knowledge of the edicts and fatwas of a mujtahid. And of course, in the present time, which is the time or the age of information, the age of internet, the age of information technology, we can of course say that there might be some other ways also through which we can obtain the fatwas or edicts of our mujtahid. For example, in today's life, we see that most of the jurisprudents have their own official websites. They have websites in different languages. As far as I know, most of the jurisprudents have their own official websites through which they communicate with their followers, with their muqallideen. They receive emails, they send their emails. Some of the answers are sealed, some of the answers are not sealed. But of course, these are the answers which are given in accordance with the verdicts of the mujtahid. They are not answers given by ordinary people in the office of that mujtahid. They are answers that are supervised by the marja at times, of course. At times they are supervised and seen and checked by the mujtahid himself. But of course, since too many answers and too many emails are received, a mujtahid sometimes do not make time to check all the answers. Some of the answers are very easy. So you receive the answers through their websites, and of course you have to act according to the answers given and sent to you through their official websites. And of course you can also make calls. Make a call to the office of that Grand Marja. There is a lujna, you call. There is a board of istifta, and of course some trusted scholars are within the board of scholars. Those trusted scholars who are well acquainted with the verdicts of the mujtahid, they try to provide, of course they do provide answers in accordance with the verdicts of the mujtahid whom you follow. And of course, if a question arises, and if a question is sent by you to the mujtahid, which is difficult, and which is not clear, which is not, of course, which cannot be solved and answered by the board of scholars, that question is sent to the marja himself to be treated and addressed by the mujtahid himself. So never worry about the answers given and sent to you by the offices of the grand jurists. The same is true with when you make a call, when you make a phone call to the office or to the board of istifta or to the person who is authorized to give answers in accordance with the verdicts of the mujtahid whom you follow. You must trust him, you must follow him. And of course there's another question regarding taqlid. That question is normally asked by people regarding a situation where there are two scholars who are believed to be equally qualified and equally knowledgeable. Can a person follow two mujtahids, two jurisprudence at the same time? The answer is yes. If those two mujtahids are equally eligible, equally qualified, and equally educated, then it is permissible to follow one of them in one subject and the other in another subject. For example, one of them is better qualified in ibadat, in the acts of worship, in fasting, prayer, hajj, zakat. These are the acts of worship. You can follow him in this area, and you can follow another mujtahid in the area of mu'amalat, or what is known as transactions. There is no doubt that it is permissible to follow two mujtahids who are equally qualified at the same time. Now, a question again arises as to how it is possible to identify, to understand that two mujtahids are equally qualified. This is very difficult. And this is not possible to identify that two mujtahids are equally qualified. This is an uphill task. And it's not the task or the job of an ordinary person, an ordinary individual, to identify that a certain mujtahid is equally qualified and equally knowledgeable and equally learned. It is as difficult as identifying the most learned mujtahid. Of course, this could be more difficult than that. It is an uphill task. And I don't think a person can become sure or certain that two mujtahids are equally learned. Because who can decide, who can determine that two mujtahids are equally learned? Of course, if there are some scholars, some reliable scholars, and some jurists who bear testimony, who testify that X and Y for example, are equally qualified and equally educated, then you can follow it. You can act accordingly. You can trust them. You can rely on their sayings. But you yourself, as an ordinary person, as a layman, cannot determine and cannot decide that two mujtahids and two jurisprudence are equally learned. That is enough for this session. Inshallah, I will follow and continue explaining the rules, some of the remaining rules regarding taqlid in the next session to come. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
اللهم اختم بعفوك أجلي وحقق في رجاء رحمتك أملي وسهل إلى بلوغ رضاك سبلي وحسن في جميع أحوالي عملي.